So I'm Scott Potter. I'm the head of engineering here at News UK, so I'm not going to do a big run through of that, but basically my teams design and develop, release and maintain all of the tablet apps, smartphone apps, websites, and all the back-end services that support them as well. So without further ado, very briefly about me, I'm leading software development black belt. Got that at Xerox a number of years ago after a long program there. First and foremost, I'm an engineer, Scrum Master and an Agile coach as well. I've been here at News UK for almost exactly 4 years actually, last week. And I initiated the transformation to try to support more business agility back in October 2013. All I really want to try to do today is just to share some of the experiences I've had over the last 12 months with something that we've been trying to focus on. I kind of realised early on in the day that I think I might put a bit too much content in here. So 4 times the content, half the charisma and a fraction of the jokes of John. This could be an interesting one, so we'll give it a go. I should briefly take you through an engineering excellence model. I put together for me primarily. All models are wrong, some are less wrong than others. And when I first said about it, trying to have a transformation, I really just needed to form a strategy and have something to remind myself. So I'll take you through that. It's personal agility, and we'll bring it into high-performing teams. So it's not very pretty to look at, and many of you will probably recognise this if you're familiar with NLP and other types of models. And there are layers beneath this, and I've amalgamated a number of different models, different things from psychology and that sort of background. So I'm not going to take you through the whole thing, but really what I do want to focus on is, the key point is, if there's anything at the bottom here that changes, the things at the top are likely to undergo change as well. So having a clear vision, understanding where it is you want to go to, understanding what it is as a team that you want to be identified for and recognised as. But what I just want to really focus on, to give a bit of context, what I'm going to dive into is the capabilities and behaviours. So from a team or departmental perspective, there's a lot of focus on our skills and our capabilities, and it goes hand in hand with behaviours. We could be the most technically competent or gifted person, but if we're not able to interact with others, or we're not really able to converse, that basic level of teamwork, quite frankly, you could maybe hold a few in your organisation, but not many. So, and the behaviours aren't also just about how, again, the skills of how you might interact, but it's also to do with your own motivations. So, just want to dive in a little bit. I'm sure many of you will also recognise this being borrowed from another model. A little bit cliche, but when we talk about people, it's very important to balance up the skill and the will, the capabilities and the motivations. So, one of the things that I'm always reminded of is at the forefront is motivated people. The Agile concept is to build teams around motivated and empowered people, which is great. What does that kind of mean if I'm heading up a department? So there are 3 key aspects that I look at, and that's making sure that individuals and teams have a sufficient right level of autonomy, that they have a real sense of purpose. It's often referred to as relatedness, again, if you're familiar with the model. But Agile generally provides us with that because we'll have a clear product backlog if we're using Scrum, and should have a clear alignment to realising some real business value in users. And also, as an individual and as a team, you have the opportunity to develop and grow. So this is just setting a bit of the basic context, but the skill side of it is really where I'm going to be sort of diving into. And yet again, I'm taking this from a background from my black belt development when I was back at Xerox. They, particularly from the agility side of it, they broke down into 3 main categories. They had technical agility, things that I'm not going to dive into. You've got XP, but actually what does it mean? It's obviously building software. Patterns might be very important, so you're mastering patterns so that you can change your software very quickly, you can do it effectively, you can deploy frequently, and you're building quality and integrity and all those wonderful things that we all know about. Personal agility is what I'm going to touch on, and the reason I just put it in the middle because that's at the heart of everything. And then there's process agility or organisational agility. So process agility, you could take something like Scrum as an example, just making sure that we're set up to help realise business agility. So we're thinking about small batches, we're thinking about minimising work in process, we're able to change direction quite quickly. Again, all the things that we're familiar with. So that's just to try and set a bit of a context around personal agility. So we've just set the scene, wind back about 15 months ago now. We'd, following on from Catcher, I'd undergone a reorg. We had initiated sort of quite substantial cultural change that John's also spoken about. The thing that was in my mind was this third aspect. It is the people at the heart of it. And it needed, the transformation was still very fragile. To be honest, 15 months later on, it still is. It's an ongoing thing. So we wanted that stickiness, we wanted that resilience, and so people need to be at the heart of it. I've a whole load of notes here, but I've lost my train of thought completely, so I'll just keep talking. So personal agility, what is it? It's in recent years, I've seen more talk about it, more conversations about it, and there are different slants on it. To be honest, that's not really that important to me, the intricacies of it. We're putting people first again, and we're thinking about what it is as an individual and the skills that individuals need to have. So I wanted to bring together a program to have real focus. We have the technical in place, and we're obviously developing that. We've got the processes and that way of thinking in place, and we're developing that. Then we want to put the people first. So when I was with Xerox, I was fortunate enough that we were flying lots of great people over. The so-called gurus actually turned out to be quite good rather than just having a good name. So just by chance, really, more than anything else, I got introduced to this guy here, Tom Batty, who may or may not be in the room tonight, so that's a little clue there. And this is a professional picture, but actually I prefer this picture. So Tom is he's not an Agile coach. Tom is a team coach and a leadership coach. Now, the reason I like this picture is because he's actually an expedition leader, so he spends quite a lot of time in Nepal, Morocco, in fact he was there last week, all over the world. And he actually uses that as one way to bring teams together, to help people find their own styles and what is leadership. So I actually, before I met Tom, and it was explained to me by somebody else before the introduction, I thought, ex-special forces, that could be quite interesting. And I wonder what his approach is. Is he really quite kind of firm? I'm not sure that's really what I want. But then I had my first conversation with Tom, and it couldn't be further from the truth. Very, very gentle, very considered. So Tom and I spoke for a while, and we devised a program, and we've just come into the completion of it. So when I was asked to talk, this was the thing I thought about talking about. So it was 4 modules, 2 days each, over a year, and we had half a day in between each, because between 3 months, we want to try and minimise the amount of people forget, try and keep a bit of momentum. It's based on the concepts of experiential learning. I have a few clicks here, but fundamentally it's learn through study, make sure you have deliberate practice, go and apply it in your workplace, and as we all know, basically inspect and adapt, reflect on it, and experiment and see how you can get better at your practices.
1, go.
It's not just sitting at desks, that's the reason I put this in. So the task here was, as you'll see in a moment, for this team, there were 2 teams doing it. This team have a set of instructions and they need to build this. And the idea of this experiential learning is, we'll talk about some concepts and then we'll have a team building exercise.
Yes, 25.
As you can imagine, it probably wasn't their first attempt. In fact, is anyone in the room that's in that video? Was that your first attempt? Yeah, of course it was. Yeah. So we'll go on to some of the concepts later that the guys would have learnt. But basically the idea is that they would learn some concepts, they'll understand how that helps them in team development and their team interactions, and also bringing into it the idea of iterating and inspecting and adapting to it. So the premise of the course is the fact that the Agile Manifesto says individuals and interactions over processes and tools. Now you go back 15 years ago, and what we do today is very much the case. But I still see it, and I still read about it, and still hear it. There's still an awful lot of emphasis on process. So that's why I wanted to try to do something a bit different. And the underlying structure is Patrick's good old 5 dysfunctions of a team, which I shan't go all the way through. But very briefly, at the base here, if you invert it, you need to have trust. If you have trust, then you can have sensible conversations. You can face into those conversations. You can have healthy conflict and healthy debate. And so it goes on up, and eventually you're able to really focus on results. Now, most teams, I think there is some research to back it up, but I'm sure you'll see it in your own experience. Most teams tend to stay around this sort of level, and there's this comment here about it's artificial harmony. So they'll seemingly get along and they'll have conversations, but I suspect there were a number of little conversations that they were avoiding having. It could be that slightly painful code review that they want to give some feedback to that individual, but the individual might be a bit prickly. There are a number of examples. The stand-up that happens, and you hear someone's update, and you're not sure if they're either pulling the weight or you're not sure if they're struggling, but you don't see that huddle happen after the stand-up. So this is why we based it on this. So one of the things that we tried to explore first was the relationship between communication and team performance. We spoke about trust at the bottom of that other pyramid there, but there are many levels of trust. And what Tom wanted to bring in, and we brought this in straight away, was understand there are different levels of trust, recognise the types of trust you have, and it's the deeper the trust and the higher up this. In fact, I call it levels of communication. I tend to refer to it as the rapport pyramid, because I think talking about rapport really brings home what it's about. And when you're in the workplace, there's a perceived degree of risk that you take when you start to engage with people, you disclose a bit more, you open up to people, and there's an element of vulnerability. I think that Stephen Covey probably refers to it as the vulnerability side of it. So we wanted to be very clear about that so that people within the teams could understand maybe where they were really at because a lot of people think they're in high-performing teams, especially if they haven't seen a high-performing team and been part of it. And then the other thing we brought in quite quickly, there are many different models, and it's true actually to say of everything I show here, very aware there are lots of different models. So all models are wrong, some are just more appropriate to what it is you're trying to discuss. So we use Tuckman's model to talk about the typical stages that teams will go through as they start to perform. And from some of the stuff we had sort of spoken about and the stuff we were going to explore over the rest of the programme, help us to think about, well, why is that? Why do teams take time to gel and perform? And then how can you potentially accelerate it? I think one of the things is Tuckman's model is often kind of assumed that that's time and you go from left to right. But in reality, people change, environments change, lots of things change. So the teams will be moving back and forth across there at any one time. And then we moved separately on. So the first bit was much more about understanding team. The second main topic was more about self and leadership. So I wonder who's the leader in that picture there? Well, the right answer is, well, leadership is everybody's business. And I can't remember if I mentioned it at the beginning or not, but the whole point is I don't propose that there's new topics or new concepts here, but actually taking the time to bring people together to sort of talk about it and crystallise it, making sure we didn't leave anything to chance. So, yeah, leadership is everyone's business. It's not the preserve of those in so-called power or authority. For people to realise that they're all individuals and they have a degree of power, they can make decisions and they can take actions that will make a difference. So different degrees, but we're not helpless as individuals. So we looked into acts of leadership and what that was. I say we, it's Tom, who I didn't just point to there because he might not be in this room. And all this comes into that understanding of that personal responsibility. So to use a model to help people just think about it, be conscious of it, very, very simple to show an act of leadership or to understand have an act of leadership. First of all, you notice, decide, and act. Is there a frustration that you've got? Is there something that maybe has come through in a retrospective? Maybe you haven't even mentioned it. There'll be something that triggers that thought that helps you realise that something needs to happen here. The next point is, will you make a decision to act? Am I going to do it? Is someone else going to do it? Is anyone going to do it? And then the final point is, you act on it and you do something about it. And then that is quite self-perpetuating. You as an individual potentially feel more empowered. You realise that it's beneficial, and especially we're talking about teams here, the teams that you realise that there are things that they can do. There's a big gap in the middle. To go between deciding to do something and actually going to do it, you have to have courage. It's one of our Scrum values, and it's kind of obvious. But actually walking through this with people, I think really did help people realise that a lot of the things that they wanted to try to do something about is something that they could change, they could try. And then the final part is, as we always do, we kind of go around, inspect and adapt. So look at what the effect was, look to see if it had the desired effect, if you need to do something else about it. Truth be told, I just come across that image and had to find an excuse to put it in. So because they're all leaders, so this is their moment of enlightenment. And this is Picard again. I just happened to see this and thought, how could this be relevant to to the presentation. He's looking rather pleased with himself. He's found his his freedom, his autonomy. As was true after Module 2, we had one of our teams that were they'd embraced the learning, shall we say. Maybe that's the best way of putting it. And they realised that some of the frustrations that they had with some of the business direction, actually, that was coming through their backlog, they hadn't bought into. They weren't sure, they weren't getting the clarity. They didn't really know why it was that they were doing it. And instead of just being on the end of this to-do list coming through, we're talking about you're the people, you can make a difference. So they decided to try to make a difference. Without furnishing with kind of the toolkit and the skills to maybe better articulate their point, it kind of went from feeling empowered to a bit of a minor mutiny. So one of the points to note is it's often referred to as going tribal, and when you get to this point in sort of realisation, individuals or teams can sometimes be a bit disruptive with their newfound power. So I wouldn't say one of our teams really went going tribal, but it was, in a strange way, it was still good to see. We see that some of the lessons were being learned and they were trying to make a difference. So then, coming back to trust, so we'd spoken about some of the team dynamics. We'd spoken about leadership as an individual and how you can do something. So then bringing some of the things back together, we're talking about trust and feedback and that relationship there. A lot of the things we're showing, we spent a lot of time on stating the obvious, but helping people remember that people are different. People react in different ways. People interpret you in different ways. If you want to understand trust, build trust, and don't undermine trust, it's kind of obvious. But let's look around this and see that people are different. So we actually had everyone had their profiles done, and they shared it with everybody else, so they could see where they were around these different spectrums. And we explored actually what trust is. That's a whole subject in its own. But needless to say, it's kind of based on your credibility, what it is that you say, and these other things here. So when you're talking about that trust side of it, and you're talking about being able to have that effective conversation, to not be scared about having that conversation with somebody else. And we explored what it was, the difference between motivational and developmental. So John, saying something was shit, I think that comes under the developmental category. And we looked at different kind of researchers out there to show that there are different models and ratios of how to try to keep the positivity when you want to give feedback and have a conversation. Lots of different models about how to help do this, but the BIF model is something, they all have something similar in common. If you want to have that slightly awkward conversation, this is something to be able to do. So you explain the behaviour of that individual, you summarise what those impacts were to the situation, what you felt about it, and then potentially how you might move on. So it could be, come on guys, you turn up late for stand-up again. And the impact was that it disrupted us all. And to be honest, we all feel like you don't feel part of this team. We're having a bit of a tough time this sprint, and we really want to know that we are together. And that's really helping individuals understand or think that they can trust one another. And a different model was about coaching, the GROW model. I'm sure it's not new to any of you. And it was really important to realise that everybody in the teams could and should be a coach. We talk about continuous improvement, and a lot of the retrospectives quite often look at process again and how we can optimise it, how can we get people to act differently. But actually, we want to be able to help others help themselves. We explored what it was to be a coach versus what it is to be mentoring, and there's a difference there. So just giving you a basic feel, really, of some of the stuff that we've done over the last 12 months. So open-mindedness, we've spoken about trying to have that trust. We've spoken about how to potentially have a difficult conversation. So open-mindedness, there's a picture of brain there. So this is probably an interesting time just to say that Tom and I did devise what this program was, and it wasn't set in stone, but we had a clear idea what the overall objective was. Now, what was quite interesting is Tom adapted the content quite a lot as he went through. So in an earlier module, he realised that he went off piece a little bit, started to explain a little bit about the amygdala and why people sometimes react in the way that they do. And because people latched onto it, he brought it in more detail to be able to prove the point. So I'm going to skim through the last because I appreciate that I've been rabbiting on. I said I had a lot to get through, didn't I? So I think one of the things we really explored is there's lots of different phrases, but when you look at the neuroscience, when you refer to science, you've got this, the brain fundamentally is in two states. It's in threat or reward. And there are lots of models again, but there are fundamentally 8 different emotions, and only 2 of them are in the reward state. So we are typically kind of wired to be a little bit cautious, a bit wary. So if you realise, are they a high-performing team? I don't know. So kind of bring some of it together. All high-performing teams, we know, they really need to have a common goal. They need to have high standards and expectations. They need to be able to resolve conflict. And and they need sort of frequent feedback, and they need to be having team-based rewards. I just wanted to dive just into one a little bit, because we've spoken about all this other great stuff, but actually I want to just skim through some of these and see that hopefully you can see that there's an obvious link between giving people the toolkit and helping people have those conversations to how it is you can actually get teams to really get to those high standards, because they know what to expect from one another. They're able to make decisions, which is something else that we've called in. There is a culture of learning and improvement because they're able to support everything and the coaching side and what they do. And the personal responsibility and ownership behaviour. So if you, coming back to the model that we'll just quickly close on in a second, if you don't have that trust with one another, and you don't really think you can hold one another accountable, then you don't really, as a team, take ownership of those things, because you don't truly feel in control.
I'm getting ready to jump up and down on it.
Go.
There's a marble in here.
Nice.
So that was a high-performing team achieving their thing. Now we hear that little cheer of jubilation every time we get a story into done. So I am actually just going to skim over the last couple of points and really just summarise on this, because we worked on understanding what trust is. We worked on making sure that we build trust. There were different levels of trust. And sometimes you have to take a bit of a risk to build that true trust. When you've got that in place, then you can have those debates, those healthy debates, that conflict. And only then can you really start to know that collectively you can have that commitment. You can start to rely on one another, because you can really make a difference and hold each other accountable. And then only then can you really start to truly focus on results. A number of things that I learned, because it doesn't always go smoothly, of course. So understanding that rapport pyramid was absolutely vital, and I was really impressed actually with how everyone kind of took to that. The main message that clearly leapt out after the event, more than when we were planning it, was this simple thing of acts of leadership. Just to remind people that they are in control, they can do something about it. And not everyone is ready to be a change agent. We wanted people to come out and not just learn this themselves, but to be able to talk with other people and be very aware, so they could start to make broader changes. And many did, but depending on the personality type or the point in their career, not everyone was wanting to engage with that. And the thing I learned was obviously the going tribal side. As well, it's kind of, to talk about lessons learned, I think probably myself, I could have spent some more time really trying to bring some of the stuff we spoke about into your everyday events. How is it relevant every day? Talking about the example with the code review, talking about examples with the stand-up. I think we were waiting to kind of have some of these things conceptual, and then in different modules bring it together, and so that penny would drop, and that probably was the wrong thing to do. And at the end of the day, I think the other thing is, it does take some time and effort, and it can be a bit painful to build your personal agility, to be able to practice these things, to have that conversation, to try to build that trust. And it's like anything else, it's that whiffing factor. What's in it for me as an individual? Am I happy with the status quo, or do I actually want to make a difference? Do I want to go through that challenge and that difficulty? So, because there's someone at the back doing this. These are the key points. I'm not going to review that again, but one of the things is we use Scrum a lot, and the way that I tend to look at the ceremonies that we have, or the artifacts, or the activities, all of those things are really kind of opportunities for people to try and develop their personal agility, to take personal responsibility, to try to get themselves and the team up this pyramid. And I think if there is probably one key thing about it is if something isn't working there, then look at that process and think about how it could actually be used. How could you help it be used to increase personal agility? Thank you.